The first time that Atlanta felt like home was one of the last times I knew I would see it. Coming home can be a tangible experience. The feeling when a familiar vista comes into view or you turn onto your street. Maybe there's a certain smell or an audible creak that your door makes when it opens. It's when you feel yourself settle into yourself, when the familiar takes over, as autopilot kicks in after hours or days or weeks or even years of hyper-awareness. You know this place. It is a place that belongs on some cosmic level to you, and you to it. It is not just the moment you walk into your house or your condo or your apartment. It's not the second that your plane touches down in the city that you live in. It's something more than just matching your physical location to your permanent address. It's the feeling of coming back and knowing where everything is, of going to a city that you loved and transformed your life, and somehow you still know all of its roads and twists and turns. It is what I'm told opening up the cottage for the first time since the winter feels like. It was last December. I was in my car, merging from I-75 onto 85, returning from the airport. It was the early afternoon, but the days are short, and so the sun was already moving towards setting, the sky lit by pale fire and not a cloud to be seen. I was alone in the car, and for once, in Atlanta, the traffic was mercifully light. I could actually enjoy the sensation of driving. And I just exhaled, unclenched, and I felt this sensation of homecoming and satisfaction. I was coming home. And just as quickly, a small piece of myself just felt a deep, biting sadness. When did this place, a place I always knew I would leave, become home? And in that split second of holding both comfortable satisfaction and distressed anxiety, I felt like I had an epiphany. This is what the soul is supposed to feel like on Rosh Hashanah, torn between the feeling of coming home and knowing that soon it will be time once again to leave. Much of humanity's most important literature has a fascination with the journey home. Homer's Odyssey, one of the oldest works of literature, is about a Greek king and his attempt to return home to his wife and son after the Trojan War. The Journey into the West, one of China's great classic novels, follows a heroic monk on his pilgrimage and his return home with sacred wisdom. And of course, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings might have the window dressing of magic and wizards and elves and dwarves, but the book is iconically about the journey there and back again. Torah, too, is a story of the journey home. We spend precious little time in the land of Israel in our Torah. Abraham is told, Lech lecha, go get yourself to that land that I will show you, and perhaps to our surprise, the journey there is quite brief. 3 verses from commandment to arrival. And several chapters later, Abraham is no more, and Isaac, unique amongst all the patriarchs, will spend his entire life in the land of Israel. His son, Jacob, will leave and return, and at the end of his own life, leave again to be with his son, Joseph, in Egypt. And as the book of Genesis closes, we will spend the rest of Torah coming home, but never again setting foot inside. The book of Deuteronomy, the Torah itself, concludes upon a mountain overlooking the eastern side of the Jordan River, tantalizingly close, but still not home. The Jewish story is greater than just the 5 books of Moses, of course, but our greater story as a people is rooted firmly in our desire, our dream of coming home. A diaspora requires a homeland. Exile requires a place you yearn to return to. But what separates fantasy and literature from reality is that Zionism and the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was not the end of the book. We came home, but we stayed home too. For as a people, the Jews found a home in a multitude of nations, including this one. Our journey home is not just the body traveling towards physical space. At least as far as the Jewish people are concerned, it is also a journey of the soul. Tshuva, repentance, comes from the Hebrew core shin, vav, bet, which means to turn back, to return. And so from its very linguistic essence then, our call for this sacred time of year to right our wrongs, to repair our mistakes, to take a quote-unquote spiritual journey is fundamentally, inescapably rooted in the concept of returning. Repentance is the act of observing God's call on us to return. And every word of our liturgy begs us, begin that process of turning home. We understand, as every prayer is said, as every psalm recited, that we are meant to be going somewhere. But where? Where is the home we are called to? Where is the home of the soul? Earlier this summer, I found myself in Montreal, which is a city that I have never called home, but is nevertheless quite close to my heart. My wife Taylor was born there, raised there, and as she often reminds me, until we met, never planned to leave. It was where we were formally engaged before she left for a year abroad in Israel. It's where we were married during an epic January blizzard a few months after she came back. And due to the vastness of life, including the pandemic, neither of us had spent more than 24 hours in Montreal since our wedding. I was nervous. We were planning a romantic day away in the city that my wife loves the most in the world. But what if something had changed? And sure enough, as we wandered down Rue Monkland, the first thing Taylor started to notice was which restaurants had gone and which had survived. St. Viator Bagel had moved, the Starbucks was shuttered, and her favorite fast food Lebanese place had been replaced by all things, a kosher restaurant. Did NDG get from? I heard her wonder aloud. To our delight, Petit Tokabi, the tiny Korean eatery in a basement apartment that had been our date night all 3 Christmas Eves I'd spent in Montreal, was still open. Her favorite pub was still there too. And as we stopped in to see a friend, it was as if no time at all had passed. The one place we didn't visit, even though it was only a block away, was the old family home. That will make me too sad, she said. I don't want to see strangers living there. Later that night, I asked her the question I'd been anxiously holding all day. How did it feel coming back home after all this time? Taylor sighed and took my hand, and she told me a story that one of our teachers, Rabbi Jan Katsu, had told her a few months before we moved to Atlanta. She was telling him how nervous she was to leave her beloved Montreal for a city and a country that wasn't hers. It was scary. Would she ever get to go home? And Rabbi Katsu is known for being especially warm and sensitive. So when he closes his eyes and takes a breath, you know that because he's being so attentive, so intentional about what he wants to say next. You know, for me, he said, home is where my wife is. Wherever she is, that's where I find my home. Well, my wife is my home is a sweet thing to say. It's also a very rabbinic thing to say. Rabbi Yossi in Masechet Shabbat is quoted as having said, "In all my days, I never called my wife, I called her my home." And that phrase, beiti, my home, as a euphemism for a spouse, is a phrase that we see repeated throughout the Babylonian Talmud. It is a nearly 1,500-year-old reminder that sometimes home is not a place. Sometimes home is people. Home is being with the people who make us feel safe and loved and known and seen. Home is the feeling of returning to those who you know will give you another chance, who understand you, who can and will forgive you for the mistakes you've made, and, bluntly, for the mistakes you will continue to make. God calls us home to those who will accept our tshuva. And as we return, I hope it should alight within us that just as we want to come home, just as we want to start again and to be blessed with love and forgiveness and acceptance, so too are others looking for that same permission from us. They need that same blessing from us. Yes, sometimes home is people, and sometimes we are someone's home. The former chief rabbi of England, the Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, wrote, "In the summer of 2000, I was invited to deliver a lecture in the presence of Prince Philip in Windsor Castle, the oldest continuously inhabited royal residence in the world, going back almost 1,000 years to William the Conqueror. In the course of my remarks, I said, 'Jews don't own buildings like Windsor Castle. We're not that kind of people. But we own something that is, in its own way, no less majestic and even more consecrated by time. The Jewish castle is built not of bricks or stone, but by words. It too has been preserved across the centuries, handed on by one generation to the next, added to and enhanced in age after age, lovingly cherished and sustained. As a child, I inherited it from my parents, as they had inherited it from theirs. It is not a building, but it is nonetheless a home, a place in which to live. More than it belongs to us, we belong to it, and it too is part of the heritage of mankind." Consider the Lord Rabbi's words. Take a moment and envision the home that has been passed down to you. Perhaps you remember sitting in this very room, next to a parent or a grandparent still next to you, or gone a year or a decade. In the rustle of the page, in the bending of the knees, we feel them as they stand next to us, as they come to us across time and infinity, as they bless us, as their memories bless us. And we feel at home here in a place that has been ours all our lives. Or perhaps this is not a place that you have called home before. Maybe you are here today because of the bond of love or the need for community in this sacred time. And this bond, this need, it may have brought you from a different synagogue or a different faith or a different path or a different city or a different country. And nevertheless, I hope that you too have felt that sensation today. That moment when the music or the words or a reading plucked on the string of memory and affinity, and this space and place, suddenly it too felt like home. And it is possible that you are here for the very first time, not only here at Holy Blossom, but here at this moment. And it is new, and it is strange, and yet there is a piece of you looking ahead already, knowing that you too could be home here. Perhaps you do not know when, but you too know that you will return. Each of us has and can find home on this day and in this place. Is it too much to dream then that the home which our souls long for, search for, return to, is not a physical place at all, but just one more palace in time. In fact, this time, this very day. Because there is no denying that this is the day which calls us home. Home in space and home in time and home in people. Jews from all over the world feel the call of home on this day to return to tradition, to return to a sanctuary, to return to family, to return to the land of the soul. How has it felt, people ask me, your first few months here? And I try to put it into words, that there's just this tiny little bit of almost mental jet lag. Because Canada is not the United States, and there are still things that I am figuring out. Like flipping the political reds and blues, or the miles to kilometers, or the Z's to Z's. And yes, we've been busy, and no, the house isn't really unpacked yet, and yes, there is always a lot going on at Holy Blossom, and yes, I'm still figuring it out, and yes, I did give up my phone number that I've had since I was 17 years old, and so I keep giving out the wrong number to anyone who asks. But I also tell people the truth, that I'm loving it, and even though I still need Google Maps to cross Eglinton, Toronto is already starting to feel like home. And a few days ago, I was saying goodbye to a volunteer in the archives. And on my way out, he asked me to make sure that I got him my photograph. And I knew what he meant instantly. Because every single day I walk past the wall of photos on the 3rd floor of the school wing of the rabbis and the cantors who have served our kahal, men and women who I look up to greatly, our teachers who have either directly or through their legacy inspired and befriended and guided me. And I smiled. Of course, yeah, black and white. You'll get it soon. And as I left that room, I had the same feeling I did on that highway in Georgia last December. Something inside of me just exhaled, and relief flowed into me, because sometimes coming home is just as simple as knowing or feeling, realizing really, that you belong. The prophet Samuel, according to the great 20th century rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, belonged to the entirety of the Jewish people. He spent the year walking a circuit from Ramah to Bethel to Gilgal to Mitzpeh, and then back to Ramah. And on his annual journey, he would dispense wisdom and solve legal disputes and build relationships between tribes, and just like a doctor making house calls, he would perform a little spiritual checkup on the Jewish people. He judged in many places, he saw many places, he knew many places, and yet his home was only in one place, Ramah. The moment he left Ramah, he was already returning there. Everywhere he went, he was heading for home. It has felt like we were away from home for quite some time. One full rotation of the world, or maybe more. But as the Rav points out, we never truly leave our home, for we are always on our way back there. Our home is the people who make up our community, our family, family of blood and family of choice. The truest relationships, the ones which nurture us and allow us to live to be our best selves, the people who, when we are separated by time or distance, are never actually far away. We feel like we are home whenever we are with them, no matter where in space we meet. And our home is this sacred time, these days of awe, the call of tshuva, the call to return, the call to be better, to be more good, more kind, more giving. These are the moments that are tinged with memories of generations past and pregnant with potential for generations yet to come, traditions that have been inherited and will one day be passed on. We come home to now, drawn by a need and a dream that escapes the boundary of language. Our home is a land far away from us, a dream and a nation and a story and a people yearning through thousands of years. And it is a home even when we haven't been there in a month or in a year or in a life. It is our home even when we choose not to live there. And our home is this very place. These pews and this room, the music and the grandeur, the shuffle and the hush, the memory and the legacy, the still private prayer of the heart, the chanted words recited as one, the ritual and the innovation, the classic and the new. These are the lands of the soul. These are the homes of the soul. For home is every place where our deepest selves, our soul knows that they belong. And can it be any coincidence that the place, Ha-Makom, is a name and a word by which the Jewish people have ever known our God? Shana Tova Umetuka, a sweet and happy new year. Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home.